So, folks, I have that it's about 5 minutes after 1. And this, not unlike yesterday's conversation, is a 2-hour learning community conversation. So it's fairly brief. And I want to make sure that we have time to go over everything that's on the agenda. And I guess I want to preface that by saying this after I say welcome and very glad that you're here and looking forward to engaging in this learning community. One thing I want to say about this particular learning community conversation topic is that actually the power of this particular topic comes from the fact that we as a learning community are all focusing on it at the same time. Because what we're going to talk about, self-care and wellness, and don't worry, I'm not going to suggest that you take a bubble bath, which is often, one of the, although they're great, and if that works for you, do it. And the thing I want you to consider, we're not going to be really talking about anything new that you're probably not aware of. The difference to consider is that we will be talking about it and exploring it together as a learning community. And that does make a difference because all of us together today, and there are about 32 of us, all of us together today at this particular moment, to some degree, have agreed that we are going to focus on self-care and wellness. And let me underline again, your self-care and wellness. So what I'd really like to underline is that this 2 hours, a little less than 2 hours now that we have, this is for you. This time is for you. And this can be part of your being in a supportive community and your self-care and wellness. And yes, don't worry, there will be some tips, and hopefully I've structured them in such a way that they may be of use to you, but there will be some suggestions and some tips that you can use as you reflect on and think about your own wellness and self-care. And I just want to acknowledge I'm wearing my Grand Canyon cap today. I'm wearing that on purpose because we're talking about self-care and wellness. And if you by any chance had the opportunity to participate in yesterday's learning community conversation, you will understand my relationship to the Grand Canyon. And I'm not going to keep that a secret. Anybody who wasn't here, I'll tell you about that later as we get there. All right, so I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and we'll take care of a couple of other logistical details before we start to reflect on and explore this topic of self-care and welfare and wellness for all. Now, I have a question to ask. It's partly a technical question, and it's also relevant to this particular topic. As I was sharing my screen here, I don't know if any of you by any chance heard the chime of a clock. If you happen to hear the chime of the clock when I was sharing my slides just a moment ago, type a Y in the chat. And if you didn't hear the chime of the clock, type an N. And if you're unsure, because I'm asking you the question, type a U. And that will be relevant. So, okay, so my microphone on my laptop is situated in such a way. Brandon, I like the fact that you're unsure. Excellent. You're entertaining the idea that maybe you did, maybe you didn't. But so far, nobody heard it. Okay, that's interesting to know. But again, it's going to be relevant to self-care and wellness, and particularly my self-care and wellness. And I'll explain that as we go forward. So again, really happy to have the opportunity to be here with all of you today in this learning community, the 35 of us, 34 of us focused on this particular topic. Yep. Sandra was also unsure. Nobody else heard it. Okay. All right. So as I often say, we are very fortunate that our funder, the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center, part of SAMHSA, funds us to create these learning community conversations. And because they are learning community conversations, they may not necessarily reflect our funders' views. And that's okay, because this learning community conversation, this opportunity for us to be together, is in order to support you in doing your work. So if that doesn't necessarily reflect the official views of the funder, that's perfectly okay, as long as you're supported in doing your work and you can continue to do your work in a way that maintains your emotional, physical, and spiritual health. As we engage in this conversation, because we want the learning community to be welcoming and safe for everybody who's here today, just keeping in mind that the words we use do have power and the language that we use matters. We want to be creating a learning community environment that is respectful, inclusive, and inspires hope and advances recovery. We want to put people in this learning community and people in general first. As we engage in this learning community conversation, especially with this topic, because we are focusing subjectively on ourselves and our own experience, we may not share the same perspective or agree with something or have had the same experience as somebody else in the learning community. It's perfectly okay. Those differences, those individual perspectives are welcome and respected here in this learning community. If you happen to hear something that you particularly don't agree with, that's perfectly okay. And if you want to offer an alternate perspective, information, or point of view, feel free. What I would ask is that we not interrupt each other, we give each other the respect to finish our thoughts, and that if you hear something that seems particularly not within the realm of your experience, that you, because you're in the learning community, you use it as an opportunity to be present and open to listening to what somebody else has to say. And the last guideline that I'll ask, and in a moment, I'm going to ask for you to visually confirm or using the chat to confirm, but the last thing I would ask you to consider is making I statements. I believe this, I feel this way, I know this to be true, as opposed to every counselor, every social worker, all peer educators, that you're actually speaking for yourself. And for those of you who I haven't had the opportunity to meet before, I just want to say briefly that my name is Paul Warren. I am currently a research project director at the New York State Psychiatric Institute, and I also happen to be a senior staff trainer and curriculum writer for the Northeast and Caribbean Addiction Technology Transfer Center. And as you probably guessed, that does mean that there are times when I'm forced to go to Puerto Rico, to St. Thomas, and St. Eunice loves it when I say that. Yes, I am forced. I haven't been forced in a really long time, but I have gone to Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, and St. Croix to actually train before. And it was a wonderful, yes, it's a very, very tough life. It's very rough, Susan Beth, you're absolutely right. Very delighted to have the opportunity to be here with all of you today. I am also a social worker by training, a graduate of Hunter College School of Social Work, and I'm also a member of the MINT, which is the Motivational Interviewing Network of Trainers, which is an international organization for people across the globe who practice motivational interviewing and also deliver training on motivational interviewing. The course I had the opportunity to engage in a learning community conversation with yesterday was about the use of MI and cultural humility together as a way to engage and retain LGBTQIA plus 16, other letters or acronyms, people in care. I began my social services career providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS in 1991. And I did that work for a little over 12 years until 2003, where I transitioned into a career mostly around training and curriculum development. So again, that's me. Very glad to have the opportunity to be here with all of you today. I'm going to share my screen again to just cover a disclaimer that I'd like us all to consider around this particular topic, which is this: that my role here today is really, it truly is, I see that, yes, you're right, it is a very tough life to have to be forced to go to Puerto Rico. But I am here as a facilitator for this conversation. And it's this couple of hours is for you to consider and to assess and also to explore your own wellness and self-care activities, how they fit into your life, and what your experience of wellness is. Because that is going to be a very personal and a very subjective experience. So I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to hold the space for us to all reflect on this, think about it together and individually, and also to support and affirm what you're currently doing, and for you to have an opportunity to hear what other folks are doing as a way to enhance any of the behaviors that you may choose to engage in that promote your wellness. Now, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment because I want to underline about why I keep focusing on your wellness. And the reason for it is because oftentimes, and I'm going to make I'm making a generalization here. I want to acknowledge that. Oftentimes, helpers, people who help, people who provide services, sometimes run into barriers or challenges around caring for themselves because they're so focused on giving to others and caring for others. If you think that's a true statement, type a T in the chat. If you think that's an overstatement, like I've gone too far, type an O in the chat. I'm very curious as to get a sense of so far I've only seen T's, although they were coming in pretty darn fast. So yes. Okay, so far I'm seeing only T's. Okay, so I'm very curious, and I'm wondering if someone's willing to unmute about this. Ramona, I'm wondering if it would be okay if I asked you this question. Would it be okay if I ask you a question about that? Ramona T, yeah. So Ramona, the question, and if you wouldn't mind, being the first person to unmute and answer this, and maybe we can hear from a couple of other people. But I'm curious from your perspective, Ramona, why do you think that statement is a true statement, that for some reason it's harder for people who are helpers or who are caregivers to focus on their own care? What's your thought about that?
My thought is it's easier to focus on others than yourself.
Okay.
I think it's mostly with me, it's by nature. So used to caring for others and looking out for others, it's come naturally. And, we got to get hit rock bottom before we pay attention to ourselves. Like, oh my God, I need a break.
Yeah. And, I want to underline, Ramona, you said it's by nature. So meaning it's just part of perhaps your personal makeup. And the other thing you said is because you've done it so much, it's just what you do. Wow. Thank you. Thank you for starting us off that way. Excellent. Jackie K, any thought about that? Why helpers, caregivers, anything you'd add? And then we'll go to Boone, but anything you would add, Jackie, to what Ramona said? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's also only 24 hours in a day.
Okay.
So when you're so focused on helping others, especially like I know I'm in a helping profession and I'm a mom. So there's only so much time that you can devote to yourself when you have so many other people to devote time to. So it's hard to find the time sometimes to focus on yourself.
Okay, great. 24 hours. This many hours go to the helping profession. This many hours go to the mom duties and joys and responsibilities. And then how much time is actually left?
Yeah. And I mean, some people are lucky and they find self-care in their children, which is fantastic, but sometimes that's not the case. And it's just how you have to work out your time in the day. And sometimes you just don't get more than 15 minutes to yourself. So it's hard.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Boone, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
I think it's because the fact that we were on the opposite end too. That's why. It's because the fact that we know how it is to not be cared for. So therefore we don't want the clients or peer to not feel what we felt when we didn't have anybody. So that's why we give our time and energy, and it's exhausting. But at the same time, I think it's because of the fact that we've been on the opposite end. So we don't want them to feel left out or anything. So that's why we give our time and energy.
Right, right, right. Because you know what it is to feel neglected or not cared for. Thank you. Thank you. A couple of things are coming in the chat. Let me read them aloud to folks. Eunice says, I am proud to say I am an empty nester. And Eunice, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but I'm guessing, and it's only a guess until you confirm it, I'm guessing that means, because you're an empty nester, that you have more than 15 minutes to give, to focus on yourself and your own wellness and your own self-care. If you'd like to unmute and elaborate on that, please do.
I would just briefly like to say that when I began in the working in the as a social worker in the human service field, that I wore many hats, and the hats only probably gave me maybe sleep time to wake up and begin to, work with the children along with dealing with my clients. Right. So now that I'm an empty nester, it took me some time to stop, working, dealing with other people's stuff and learning how to give back to myself. And that took quite some time with therapy and stuff. Like, it's okay. Yeah. I had to give myself permission to take care of myself. And that's because of, I forget who said it earlier, was because I was raised to be that nurturer, to give and always take care of others. So it was just, it took me some time to give myself permission to take care of me now. So I'm at the point now where I'm appreciating being an empty nester and giving time to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Eunice. And, I want to underline a couple of things that Eunice said. And Eunice, thanks for being such an excellent model of making I statements as well. But I really want to underline that the process you described is like really making an adjustment, because you're so used to interacting in your life in a particular way that to actually bring some of the focus onto yourself, some of that self-care and wellness onto yourself, you're kind of acknowledging that was an adjustment for you. You had to actively seek out support and resources in order to make that adjustment, because you had to get to the place where you could give yourself permission to give yourself that kind of care and time. Yeah. Thank you. I'm gonna look at a couple of the other things that people put in the chat. I also believe that others become reliant on us and we naturally respond to them before we know it. It becomes a regular thing. Absolutely. Susan also, that was Savitri who said that. Susan says, helping others used to be my self-care, LOL. Okay. We are tuned in to need, and it becomes a habit and drive to meet the need. Wow. being a natural caregiver, again, that nature, again, that was referred to, being able to give selflessly is easy, but finding the balance to care for myself is also important. Agreed, that's very true. Finding therapeutic activities like baking, walking, breathing, and meditation. Excellent. All right, folks, I'm going to share my screen again. So again, what we have kind of on the table at this particular moment is we're acknowledging that the helper, not all, but at least some of the people in our learning community, the helper, there can be challenges or an adjustment to allowing yourself the time, the resources, or the space to focus on your wellness and your self-care. And that's partly maybe, as Ramona said, because of our nature, and it can be partly because of our experience, or it can be because it's the expectation of those around us. So all those things can help reinforce the pattern of give, 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 give. And Ramona, I think it was you who said this, I'm not sure, but you said something to the effect of, and I hope it was you that I'm remembering properly. You said something to the effect of like, until there's, you didn't use the word breakdown, but until there's like some thing that happens that now I need to know I need to take a break. How did you frame it? How did you describe that? What did you say that when this, you don't remember? Does anybody remember how Ramona described it? Because you didn't say breakdown. Rock bottom. That's it, Susan Beth. You have to hit rock bottom. Well, folks, if there's one thing you walk away with from this learning community conversation today, walk away with rock bottom from Ramona. Because if you've gotten to the place where you're hitting rock bottom, or you're really on empty, that could really do serious harm to you, to your relationships with your patients or your clients. And that's not, you want to be able to continue to do what you do. Yeah, burning out is too far gone. Yeah, I agree, Susan Beth, that's not healthy. Yep, agreed. And again, we'll remember Ramona's rock bottom. We'll remember that because it really painted a picture, Ramona, when you said it. I couldn't remember the exact words, but I remembered exactly what you kind of described. And a bell went off in my head. And the other thing I'll throw out, and again, I'm just throwing this out for people to consider, is that only we can determine how close we are to rock bottom. I mean, sometimes other people can see the signs. They can see the crispiness of the burnout, and they may say something to us. But ultimately, it's our responsibility to be watching where we are on that spectrum. And for really two primary reasons. Two primary reasons. Primary reason number one, to protect your physical, emotional, and spiritual health. Just primary reason number one. Two, primary reason number two, to make it possible for you to remain as effective as you can be doing your work. And those two primary reasons, in that order: your emotional, physical, spiritual health, primary, number one. Number two, so you're able to continue to be effective in your work. But, and keeping in mind, folks, in that order. Susan Carr, could I ask you a question?
Yes.
So in your own words and your own thinking, what is your thought about why I'm emphasizing that prioritized order? Your physical, emotional, spiritual well-being first, and then your ability to do your work. What's your thought about why I'm prioritizing that way?
Well, to me, if you don't protect your physical, emotional, and spiritual health, you really can't do the work. So that has to come first.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
work, then once you've done that,
Right.
then you can be effective in your work.
Absolutely. 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 And I strongly believe that. I know that there are a lot of folks who they get very close to rock bottom, and they're continuing to do the work. They're continuing to do the work. And then go ahead, Susan, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say it's also an ethical responsibility, because what you're describing, if someone's at rock bottom, because I've been there trying to do the work, and literally someone would not show up for an appointment, and instead of wondering what happened to them and caring, I was like, oh, sweet, I got time to do other stuff now, because I was taking on too many things and too burned out.
Yeah.
So it hurt the people that I was supposed to be caring for. And that's not a good place to be in. So I had to make changes.
Thank you so much, Susan. Yeah. Go ahead, Dorna, please. I see you. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead and unmute. Dorna, we can't hear you. You're muted still.
Change the way I did things too, because I would think about the job before I go to my medical appointment. I would come to the job and leave. I said, oh, I can get there by 1 o'clock, just because I thought about the job before my health. And I would go to the appointment and then say, oh, we can't see, you got to reschedule. So I had to change the way I did things. Like now, I said, oh no, I have to, if I have a medical appointment, because I see too many of my coworkers who leave the job for 20 something years and you end up sick, and one of my coworkers now is in a nursing home because he left the job. He didn't take care of himself. Now he didn't retire. He retired and he's sick, so that was a wake-up call for me. So now if I have a medical appointment, if it's 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm taking the day off, so that I can take care of myself. But I was a learn that I had to change. I think, like, I have to get things done. If I don't show up, I'm gonna be behind. I'm gonna be late with my work. I have poor letters, so it does take a toll on us. That but it's, as Uni said, it's a learning curve for us as we get older in the business to start taking care of ourselves much better than we used to. And sometimes it take our co-workers leaving here sick to give us that wake-up call that we need to take care of ourselves better.
Thank you so much, Dorna. And, I really want to link something that you said. And Lisa, I see your hand. Don't lose your thought. I really want to link what Dorna just said to what Susan said earlier, because you both said the exact same thing. You both said, and correct me if I'm wrong, either of you, but I heard you both say, and I really want to underline this, folks, I had to make some changes. Did I get that right? Okay. No. Okay. All right. I want to underline that Dorna and Susan did not say somebody else had to make changes for me. They said, I have to make some changes. And, again, think of Dorna's story that she just told us. A coworker who had to leave the job after 20 years and went to a nursing home, got sick. And again, it could have been for a variety of reasons. And I would venture to guess, running on empty, running on rock bottom could do that. So we'll go to Lisa and then we'll go to Charity. Go ahead, Lisa. And thanks for your patience, Lisa.
Thank you. And thanks for everything that's been said this far, because it pulls right into what my thoughts were. As recognize that I am not as present as I used to be.
Yes.
And you want to care, you care. But then at some point, it's not that you don't want to care. It's you've gotten to the point where you just don't feel like I get to the point where I don't feel as though I was having the capacity that I used to have.
Yes.
And Eunice had said about becoming an empty nester. That transition, I think, helped me get back on track. I'm certainly not 100% there, but I've been taking some time and seeing things because I don't want to not get to a point where I start having less empathy for the people I have.
Yeah.
And I have been seeing a lot of people leave the field, and I've been in human services for over 35 years.
Uh-huh.
Working addiction and mostly crisis type management and addiction for 21.
Wow.
So yeah, that's a huge thing. So I'm really appreciating hearing everyone saying that and backing that up, because I recently kind of redid what, people talk about bucket lists.
Mm-hmm.
I redid that bucket list because as you get older, you realize how much you can't do that was on your bucket list when you were in your 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
think those things may be overrated, but other things are, you can just call them goals or whatever.
Right.
How do I get there if I decide to work myself into the ground and not truly have the experiences and have this more to give than I'm giving now
Mm-hmm.
to take care of myself? So I think that's a huge thing.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Lisa. And again, I want to underline something that Lisa shared before we go to Charity, which is that, and Lisa, tell me if I'm capturing this, you got to a point in your life where you took stock of what was most important and what were the priorities, and you kind of redefined what, and again, your bucket list is a good example. You redefined, these are the things that are important to me, and these are the things that I'm going to make sure that I have the capacity to be able to do for the quality of my life.
Correct.
Did I got that right, Lisa?
Completely. You realize you're not where you want to be. And when you're not straight, then you're not what you need to be for other people in a healthy profession.
Yeah. Thank you. And Susan, Eunice, Lisa, Ramona have been talking about noticing these changes and then responding accordingly in regard to, if you start to realize that your level of empathy is decreasing, that's a message to you. And we're always getting messages about ourselves as we do this work, and we ignore those messages, potentially at a huge rock bottom cost. Ramona, I may consider renaming this training. Avoiding rock bottom. Excellent. Charity, thanks so much for your patience. Go right ahead.
Oh, no, thank you. I learned the very hard way about self-care. I, work full time, sometimes another job on top of that. I'm involved in my tribe in more ways than sometimes I have time for. And I'm a single parent of two wonderful, amazing daughters who are two daughters. And I had aphasia. I got psychosomatic aphasia. I couldn't speak. I think, it was, I can only equate to my brain was finally like, you know what, you're not talking enough and you're not like working through things enough on yourself. So I'm not going to let you talk at all. For 3 months, it was kind of getting back to where I could actually use my voice, because I wasn't using my voice. And so I've learned, when I get where I'm at my lid, I have to disconnect from everything. And, it's like, nope, I'm not picking up my personal cell phone for, 3 days. I'll only pick up my work one because of work. But other than that, no. So it's a tough lesson to learn. But I've had a stroke too. So my doctor was like, you need to be really careful, and let's be glad that your body gave you this little, hey, you're getting there.
Yeah.
indicator before it could have gotten really worse.
Yes. And I think we should probably be pretty straightforward in saying, folks, that some people, when they hit rock bottom, they don't come back. That this can be fatal. And Charity's point is powerful, that at a certain point the body will say, if you're not going to stop, I'll stop you. And again, you don't have to go to that particular place. The other thing that I really took out of what Charity just said, and I just want to underline it again, none of this is new to any of us. But again, Charity told us a really powerful personal story, that part of her wellness and self-care today is about setting limits. You know what? I am not going to pick up this phone at this particular point. I am going to focus on this because it's good for me.
Yeah. And it's really hard when I work for my tribe.
Yes.
On 3 different boards where I'm the secretary. I'm on 2 other boards where I'm a founding member. I am an advocate for our youth and our Pathways to Healing Domestic Violence program. And I'm a safe haven for, my house for youth that are in need of a safe haven. And so those are all commitments I've made, and I can handle them for the most part. But sometimes those things just get so high, and it's the hardest thing in the world to put my cell phone down, because these are my family. They're people that I know and I love, and I have to say no.
Yep. And again, I want to link that back to what Ramona said earlier about that. For many of us, it's our nature to care. And it is hard to say no. And sometimes we have to set that limit in order to say yes to ourselves, so that we will be able to go forward. I'm going to share my screen again. And again, the overall goal really, and we're achieving it already, but it's to be able to be in a supportive, reflective learning community where we are kind of considering these things and being reminded of them. Because again, there's nothing new here, but we're being reminded of them together, and being reminded of them because of what people are telling us about their experience and what they've learned as they've reflected on the experiences in their lives. Just going to quickly check the chat. Okay. So wonderful. So people are kind of commenting on shared experience. Thank you. So to that end, these are our learning objectives that we will take a moment to reflect on the golden rule and its challenges. I'll put it that way. I will also share something with you from a book called The Stress Cycle, and I'll share the title of the book with you in case it's something that you might find helpful. We're also going to talk about a micro self-care, meaning small self-care activity that we can engage in at any time, individually or together, and we are going to do it together, and it's called taking a pause. And we will also focus on the acronym HALT, and many of you for a variety of reasons may be familiar with what that acronym actually stands for. You can think of it this way, that it's a wonderful way to reflect on what need you may have at any given moment. Because again, we're responsible to meet our own needs. So is there anyone who could remind us, and feel free to unmute, is there anyone who could remind us of what the golden rule is?
Yep. You want me to go? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you.
Yes, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, we as providers, we probably want to, be approaching people with the respect and the empathy and the kindness that we would want offered to us if we were in that situation. So there's, we're going to try and interact with people as best we can from that perspective. We're going to try and treat them as well as we want to be treated. Is that a fair statement? If you think that's a fair statement, type an F in the chat or a Y. If you think it's an inaccurate statement, okay, so most people, you could type an I, but most people are saying they think that's a fair statement. I think that the thing to keep in mind though, folks, is that in the service provision arena or world, the golden rule is not reciprocal. Meaning that that's how we may meet people and approach people, because that's connected to the ethics of our profession. It's part of our personal credo or human nature. We may not get that in return from the people we're interacting with. And I'll share my screen again to outline, yes, and we know that this is the golden rule, that we may have expectations or wishes that the people we provide services to or the colleagues we work with, we may have expectations that they might say good morning to us, they might show us respect, they might behave like adults, that they may do what they're told to do, i.e. clients, possibly, that they may say thank you. We may have all kinds of other expectations because we're a human being interacting with other human beings. But again, the problem is what is the problem with having expectations? Susan Beth writes, we expect it as the golden rule. However, it does not always happen. It does not mean that we do not continue to treat them with the utmost respect regardless. Absolutely true. The question I have, though, is if we have the expectation, I love, Susan, can you say a little more about that? I like the way that sounds. Expectations are premeditated resentment. Say a little more about that.
I did not come up with that. That is kind of a recovery community saying, just if you have expectations, you might as well know right now you're going to develop resentments around it because people don't do what you expect them to do.
Yes.
So I always think that's a great way to look at it.
Agreed. And I will also throw out, folks, it's very hard as a human being helping other human beings to not have expectations. And unfortunately, we can be in situations where we're disappointed. Those expectations are not met. Those resentments may develop. And having those expectations could potentially create burnout or worse, rock bottom. Ramona liked that. So just keeping that in mind, that maybe starting with, well, do we have expectations? And if we do, how can we let go of those expectations? And don't misunderstand me. That doesn't mean that you should be treated poorly or without respect or any of that. It just means that you may not be treated with the respect that you feel you've offered. Go ahead, Eunice, go ahead.
I'm like really enjoying this moment here only because I do have expectations. However, my supervisor, and I was thoroughly upset when she told me I need to learn how to minimize or my expectations. Lord, I was hurt. I was hurt.
Yeah.
Because it was a matter of wanting more than what I was receiving. And I felt like she should have been more encouraging to me. However, now that we're having this conversation, I'm having a better understanding of her honesty with me, although I didn't like it. So,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. And you know, Eunice, thank you for sharing that, because I bet you're the only person in this learning community of 37 people that doesn't like not having their expectations met. I bet you are the absolute only.
I feel crazy.
I am kind of crazy, but you're right. And I'll tell you, it does hurt. And the reason I brought it up is because I want us to know it's human. I want to underline, we know this, but I just want to underline that it's human to have those expectations, and it's not necessarily possible within the work setting with the people we're providing care to that those expectations are going to be met. So self-care and wellness become critical.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
So excellent. So
thank you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, of course. Monica, please. I see that you have your hand raised. And to pause, I'm not sure if you were raising your hand or if you were just applauding with the thought. So if there's something you want to add, feel free to unmute after my. Yeah, excellent, perfect. Go ahead, Monica, and then we'll go to pause.
Thanks, Paul. Well, the thing with expectations is it goes both ways, right? You can have very low expectations, and then people may live down to those expectations, or you can have very high ones, and sometimes people do live up to those higher expectations. It's just knowing when to apply what that's reasonable, I think.
Agreed, 100%. And I think, and maybe I didn't say this as clearly, because I want to build on what Monica is saying, is that as a provider, it's not reciprocal that we're going to get back what we give. Is that fair? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to, again, because we can always bring that back to, and I love the fact that that Eunice said, like, I didn't like that. Like, it hurt. It does hurt because we are human beings. So that's where the self-care and the focusing on that becomes critical. Yes, go right ahead. Excellent.
Hi, everyone. So I wanted to piggyback off of what Eunice said. So at my job, we have a morning meeting before the program starts. So we discuss the clients and everything like that. So, you know, a lot of people have issues with certain behaviors that the clients have. And the director always says, the clients will be clients. So you come and you be professional and treat them with courtesy and respect, but be mindful that they will act the way they're supposed to act. So you meet them where they are and you handle the situation. So, you know, you just have to learn to do that. Check I'm learning to check myself. You know, you learn about yourself when you get put in certain situations, and you learn how to handle it. And you learn more about your character and how you're able to handle situations. So I just stay in the mindset of know that the client is doing what they're supposed to be doing. And you could also use it as a teaching moment and teach them about, you know, what they're doing, whether it's correct or incorrect, how they could have approached the situation better. And you both learn from the situation.
Yes, and that's when it can be a win-win for both. And I want to connect what you just said with what Monica said earlier, because Monica, I don't want to lose sight of another piece that you said. We also don't want to assume that just because somebody is a client, that they're not going to offer respect, or they're not going to, because that happens. There are clients that seek out services and they're able to be respectful. They show up, they participate in the care. And again, we don't want to make assumptions one way or the other, and we want to be prepared to care for ourselves no matter what comes down the road in terms of the behavior or the interaction. Lisa, the floor is yours. Go right ahead.
You brought up HALT, which is kind of an old school.
Yeah.
The thing that keeps coming to my mind in this conversation is the idea of the vessel. I keep seeing this pitcher of water that's 3/4 full, and I keep putting more and more stressors on it, and it overflows. You know, you like the rock that gets put into the vessel, and the vessel overflows, and that's I was taught many years ago that you are supposed to be the empty vessel for individuals who are overflowing. So self-care, you know, coming back to what that is, means that my vessel has to at least be low so that I can take that on. And I think that being part of the expectation is that I can hold that stuff to them. I have had many people come back that done very well, that will say things like, I was a real I was so mean. I came in and I'd say, no, you know, you were healing and you were doing these. The whole time people are speaking, and when we were speaking about expectations and what we expect, if we are an empty vessel, or we've been taking care of our own stress, expectations aren't there. One of my major signs when I was struggling more was that I started having expectations. I went years without having expectations. I started struggling because it'd just been too much, too long before I really took care of myself. And I all of a sudden had expectations.
Because again, that was something that crept into what you were doing, because your vessel, to use your image, was overflowing. It was too full.
Which we have often, not always, like you say, not everybody's in a different point in how they're doing, is what our actual clientele was, is their vessels were overflowing, and that's going to happen more.
Truly. Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to just quickly check the chat. Susan Bond writes, this entire discussion just makes me think about reciprocity. Understood. Arlene, uncommunicated expectations result in resentments. Truly. Very similar to what Susan wrote in the chat about premeditated resentments. Susan also adds in the chat, we have high hopes and belief in their ability to succeed while not placing our own desires for validation on them in the form of expectations. Yes, very, very wise words, Susan. And I'm going to repeat them. We have high hopes and belief in their ability to succeed while not placing our own desires for validation on them in the form of expectations. Yes, because that is a setup for failure for everybody. For us, for them. Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, folks. And I think we've determined wholeheartedly what some of the problems with expectations actually are. Ooh, so hold on just a second. I want to go back to, this is the book that I mentioned. I don't know if anyone has read this book. I have found it a valuable resource, and I was particularly, Talisha writes, understanding a person's capacity is important as well. And I would add to that, and tell me if you're okay with this, Talisha, that knowing our own capacity or limits is critical too, because at a certain point, we may have to set a boundary so we don't exceed our limits. I just want to, okay, so you agree with that. And I see that you put it all in caps. Okay. So this book, especially around the stress cycle as they describe it, I found it particularly interesting. It's written by these two sisters, Emily and Amelia. And the title is The Secret to Unlocking the Stress Cycle. And again, the secret that they mention isn't really that big of a secret, and it's not really going to be anything that's not already known by many of you. What it does require, I think, maybe for each of us at given times in our lives, it does require action and making adjustments to how we're going forward. So to that end, what I wanted to share with you from the book, and I'm very curious if you've read this book, type a Y in the chat. If you have not read this book, type an N in the chat. And if you can't remember if you read this book, type CR, which means can't remember. Yeah, okay. Got one can't remember, got some knows. Okay. So they share from the book what they define as the stress cycle. May we have the link to this, Paul? Would like to read it myself. Absolutely. I think actually if you just Google it, you can find the book that way. But what I'm going to share with you from the book is this idea of that they've kind of composed and put together in a very, I think, accessible way is, and by the way, you will also get a copy of these slides. Arlene says, none of us have. Okay. You will get a copy of these slides, which has the title of the book in it as well. But they lay out the stress cycle. So this lion, if you think of the stress cycle, this lion is the stressor. It's the thing that potentially we are coming across that is causing stress. And what they suggest is that, let's say we're walking down the road and we come across this lion, we have a reaction to it. I don't know about you, but I don't know if I would take my glasses off if I came across a lion, but at least this is the stock photo that my colleague, Dina Vandersloot, who created these slides, she created, and I know why she chose the slide because of the wonderful look on his face. He's having a strong reaction to running across this particular lion. So again, we encounter the stressor, we have a physical and emotional reaction, and then we flee. Our running away impulse kicks in, and we physically run away from the stressor, and we get to a place where we are safe, and we can then communicate to the people around us, to the folks in our community, what happened, and then we're able to just go on and go forward with our lives. We're not traumatized by the situation. We've completed the stress cycle. We've experienced the stressor. We have an emotional and a physical reaction. Our physical reaction turns into flight. We get away back to safety. We then share the experience with the people around us. We integrate that experience and we go forward with our lives. So I'm going to pause there and just ask, any thoughts or any Brandon, any thought or any reaction to that? The idea of that stress cycle and sort of completing the loop Any thought or any reaction to that?
It's very interesting, and I mean, just overall with like self-care. I mean, in order to get through that stress cycle, it's important that we are taking care of ourselves, and that we understand, the magnitude of all that.
Yeah, agreed. And I want to add to what Brandon is saying, because I think the one thing, and you may have observed this in that sort of that diagram, and this is where, and I really appreciate you mentioning the importance of the self-care, Brandon, because in the completed stress cycle, there's no accumulation of the stress. The stress is released. It's released through the body. It's released through the sharing of the event. So there's no holding on to it. It's released. It's the accumulation that begins to be problematic. So thanks, Brandon. So I'm going to share my screen again. And now they suggest this is the completed stress cycle. What they suggest, Tapaz, thank you so much for putting that in the chat. Yeah, Amazon has the book. Excellent. They suggest that there's something called the modern day stress cycle. Now, keep in mind what we saw before, and we can always go back to it if we need to. But let's say in this scenario, the stressor is, and I think it's fair to say that this supervisor does not look too pleased at this particular moment. So let's say the stressor is a displeased supervisor. So there's the stressor, there's the reaction. Oh my God, my supervisor's displeased. And they're telling me that I'm having a reaction. Well, if you remember what the next picture was in the completed stress cycle, remember, this is the modern day. The other one was the completed stress cycle. If you remember what the next picture that follows this was, and I don't mean the arrow, but the next picture in the prior stress cycle, type it in the chat, because, well, I'm going to see if anybody remembers. Yes. Let's see. Yes. Susan's got it. Lisa's got it. Ramona. Yes. It's the running away. Well, guess what, folks? We're in the modern stress cycle. You're experiencing the stress from your supervisor. You have the physical and the emotional reaction. And guess what? Your impulse might be to run away, but because of the situation, you can't run away. So you're still there. And you may recall that the next thing would have been that you run away to safety, and then you communicate it to the people around you, and then you integrate it and go on with your life. Well, in the modern stress cycle, they're saying that there are these 2 points of blockage, basically, where the physical and the emotional energy that's created from the stressor is held in the body. And the person is stuck in an unexpressed, unresolved stress loop. Now, we've had some examples already. Yes. Notice she's not running away. She can't run away because she's at work. So the thing I want to underline here is that there are these 2 points of blockage. So the stress is there. Now, we've had some pretty powerful examples early on about the impacts of these blockages. So I'm going to ask everybody for just a moment to think, what's the first thing that comes into your head as a negative outcome of not being able to complete the stress cycle. What do you imagine is a negative outcome of not being able to complete the stress cycle? And type it into the chat. Yes. Breakdown, health issues, high blood pressure, built up stress. Yes, Monica. Health, nervous breakdown, my being unwell, health problems, prolonged anger, health issues, anxiety, health, irritability, unable to cope, increased risks. Powerful. Yes. Health, anger, relationship issues. Absolutely. And again, if you haven't put something in there yet, please, what headaches? Yes, Eunice, absolutely. Whatever pops into your mind, what's the first thing that you could imagine could be the downside? Loss of patience, breakdown. Absolutely. Absolutely. The primary reason for self-care, you mentioned spiritual, physical, and emotional health, are lost. Yes. Stress. Absolutely, Crystal. All right, folks. So I'm going to share my screen again. So the modern day stress cycle creates these blockages. Now, we probably get stuck in these cycles for a lot of reasons. And sadly, they become chronic. Yeah, irritability, Susan Beth, absolutely. And you know, I don't know about you, but I'll make a personal I statement here. If I'm experiencing irritability, that is what I would call the early warning broadcast system, or an early sign that I need to take something to, and I'm going to use the vessel image that we got earlier. If I'm starting to be irritable with other folks, that is a sign for me that like my vessel is too full and I need to do something to manage my stress so that it doesn't become chronic stressors. And chronic unresolved stress can result in relational, spiritual, physical lack of health. Yeah, rocky waters, absolutely. Other reasons we get stuck in the stress cycle, and there can be a lot of them. Social appropriateness. Well, I mean, I'm thinking of that example of a dissatisfied supervisor. It is not socially appropriate whenever we feel stressed out to just run off physically and run to a place of safety. We just can't, do that at times. And sometimes it is safer in the moment to stay where we are, and then that leaves us with something that we need to manage going forward so that there's not an overaccumulation that becomes chronic that starts to affect us on physical, emotional, and spiritual levels in a negative way. Yes, Lisa, thank you so much for adding that. And I'm going to read what Lisa wrote in the chat. The more stress I have, the less competent I feel. And I would imagine that that's psychological. And if it becomes chronic, I think what can happen is one's competence can actually decrease. And we had some very powerful examples of that. Charity also writes, well, we just shouldn't because of the consequences of us just running. Absolutely. Yes. So again, it leaves us with something that needs to then be attended to or managed, because again, we ignore it at the risk of our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. So, and then we're underwater, and it's not a good situation for us, for the people we work with, and for the people we provide care to. And again, I want to prioritize. It is especially not a good situation for us the individual. So there are a number of evidence-based strategies. And again, none of these are going to be surprises. There are a number of evidence-based strategies to manage stress. And these can be intentional and effective ways to complete the stress cycle. So these are activities that we can choose, we can adjust and choose to engage in that can actually complete the stress cycle. Now, before I reveal these, which again, none of them are going to be anything you haven't seen before, I want to ask a question, which is this. Given what we talked about the completed stress cycle, okay? And remember, the completed one, not the modern day one that's not completed, but the completed one. Given what we talked about with the completed one, what's your guess, or what do you know would probably be the most effective activity to engage in order to complete the stress cycle? And again, I'm giving you a little bit of a hint. You probably already know this, but I'm giving you a little bit of a hint by saying it's very connected to the completed stress cycle. Any guesses, any thoughts about what the number one evidence-based strategy for completing the stress cycle is? Anybody want to go out on a limb? Interesting. People are putting it in the chat. That's fantastic. I want to read what people wrote. Talking it out, mindfulness, exercise, breath, self-reflection, sleep, step back, assess, seek support, and respond better. Talk about it. Okay. All right. Anybody else want to throw a hat into the ring? Meditation, Crystal. Journaling, Susan says. Journal, Ashley says. Excellent. Okay. Oh, I love that. I think somebody just put in, for me, it's shopping on Amazon. Yes. Grilling. Absolutely. Excellent, Brandon. Let us know when the food will be done. We'll all be over. Excellent. Love grilling. Fishing. Yes. Yes. Gardening. Peer support. Absolutely, Susan. Yeah. Getting support from a peer who's in the same boat that you are and knows kind of, yeah, gardening. Absolutely. I have to confess, Arlene, I was in the garden this morning doing a little weeding before I got.
Push continue.
Yes. All right.
Yeah. Push.
All right. Hobbies. Yes. All right. All right, everybody, what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to try and do this quickly so you don't have to maintain the drum roll for long, but drum roll, please. The number one strategy, I'm sharing my screen, the number one strategy for completing the stress cycle, and I love that you're putting things in the chat too, is physical activity. So physical activity, you can stop the drum roll, by the way, but physical activity is one of the top, some sort of exercise, top things that can help complete the stress cycle. And again, I know for some people that can create stress because trying to fit physical activity into their daily life cycle can be challenging. Yes, but physical activity is what the research and what they share in the book as being the number one, the top strategy. Charity wrote also in the chat, I go to the river, stand in it and let the water wash it away. Sometimes I have to dunk my whole body in the wash to wash it all away, but usually just my feet. Yeah, and Evelyn is including, does that include sex? I would say absolutely. that is a form of physical activity, and it can be, again, depending, it can also be a very rewarding emotional experience, and we'll get to that in a moment. So that would be kind of a combination of both. And Charity says, I run my mouth. Does that count? And a lot of people are also voting for sex as well, through either firecrackers or laughing out loud. Absolutely. So physical activity, number one, connection and positive social interactions. Absolutely. Laughter. And I have to say, I love this picture because I have certainly, during learning community conversations, during moments in my life, I've certainly experienced laughter the way I feel that the folks in this picture are experiencing it. And even if they're just models, they're doing a really good job of communicating the great release and connection that I've experienced when I'm laughing with people that I feel safe and care about. Sleep, meditation, and rest. Creative expression. This is also a big one personally for me. I love to make things out of wood, wire, paper. I just like to make things. And I find that very healing because my mind shuts off and my hands and my soul are kind of working together, and then something kind of comes out at the end. Affection. And that can be affection with another person. It can be affection with the creatures that we're blessed to live with or that we share our homes with. And then for some people also being able to cry, the ability to express tears, either alone or with other people, can be a great way to get those emotions actually out. So this slide, I think, to me, speaks to the whole idea that, we think of wellness, we think of self-care, and yes, our wellness is a state of being. And what this is really suggesting, and what the book suggests, is that really our wellness is deeply connected with our state of action, our ability to engage in a variety of activities that help complete the stress cycle. So to me, Charity adds in the chat, in my culture, we are not supposed to create something, necklaces, beadwork baskets, when we are holding hard feelings or stress. We are taught that we are feeling goes into what we are creating. Absolutely understood, Charity, in terms of a cultural practice. Monica writes, I agree. It doesn't just happen. We have to actively work on it. Which is why I have about 10 projects I have to finish, Charity says. Okay, because you don't want to have those hard feelings or the stress go into the thing you're creating. Understood. So if there was a second thing that you walk away with in terms of our learning community conversation today, I'd really like you to consider and sort of link your experience to being in this learning community today and our conversation together today with this particular slide, that wellness really is not a state of being, and it's a state of action, that we really want to be considering the actions that will support and promote our well-being. Lisa writes, letting go is one of the biggest actions I can do. I agreed, that is an action. Choosing to let go of something and let go of the stress associated with it. Absolutely, Lisa. Absolutely, that's an action. So you may have noticed, as I mentioned earlier, I'm wearing my Grand Canyon hat, and I'm now showing you a picture, and I've already tipped it off. This is the same picture I showed yesterday. I took this picture, by the way. This is the picture of the Grand Canyon. And I'm showing you this because this is a place where I have gotten so much physical activity through hiking, backpacking, camping, and it's also a place that I find spiritually and emotionally very healing. And this is the wonderful dog that lives at my house with us. And if you know what breed this dog is, or you'd like to take a guess, please put that in the chat. I love to share these pictures because the point I'm really making, and here's the third picture, and then I'll tell you the point I'm making, which is this is a clock. I love clocks and I love the sound of them. And that's why I asked if you could hear the chime behind me before, because I have a chiming clock behind me, but it's not this one. This one's upstairs. But I love clocks and I love to take them apart and figure out how they work. But I'm mentioning and sharing these images with you because wellness and you is going to be unique to you. I'm showing you 3 things that allow me to engage in activities that contribute to my wellness and to my well-being and to my self-care. And that is going to be a very unique, a couple of people are guessing. And I love what Lisa put, 100% good dog. You know what? That is true. Many people think he's a terrier of sorts or a Jack Russell. He's actually a Basenji. That's the type of breed that he is. Basenjis are unique because they don't bark. They can howl, though they can make very strange noises, but they don't bark. They don't smell. They don't have any dog smell at all. And they don't shed. So that's why we got him. And he's wonderful. And he is a 100% good dog. Yeah, it is a little bit tricky. It's called a Basenji, and his name, I'll type his name in the chat, which prompts me to ask another question. If you know this, the inspiration for his name, I'm going to type it in the chat. His name is, and it's not B-I-N-G-O, it's not bingo. His name, I'm typing it in the chat. And if you know where this name comes from, put that in the chat. That is our Basenji's name. And we call him Emo for short. Yes, it is definitely Egyptian. You are right. The name originally originates from Egypt. It also has a cinematic reference, if anybody knows. You can type that in the chat. Yes, The Mummy. It's from The Mummy, the original Mummy and the remakes of The Mummy. There is a character, the evil guy is Imhotep. So folks, I mentioned earlier that one of the micro activities that I wanted to share with you was taking a pause. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite us all to do that together. And let me explain what we're going to do together. I'm going to ask you to take everything out of your hands if you can. And I know that's hard because you may be doing other things. Try and take everything out of your hands and be as comfortable as you can possibly be. And all I'm going to ask you to do is I'm going to ask you to take a breath in. I'm just describing it now. You don't have to do it, but do keep breathing. It's good to keep breathing. So I'm going to ask you to take a breath in. And when you take that breath in, just pause briefly and then let the breath out and then pause again briefly before you take your next breath. So it'll be breath, pause, exhale, pause, inhale. Okay? I'm going to ask you when I say go, and I'm not saying it yet, but when I say go, I'm going to ask you to do that 3 times on your own. So you're going to take a breath in, you're going to pause, you're going to exhale, you're going to pause, and then you'll take another breath in. And you're going to do that 3 times on your own. So when I say the word I'm going to say, I want you to do that 3 times on your own. And when you're done, when you've done it, just type a Y in the chat when you're done. Go. Excellent, excellent. So what I'm going to ask you to do now for just a moment, folks, before we go forward, is I'm going to ask you to reflect on yourself for a moment. And if there's a word that you could type in the chat that describes your current physical state, type it into the chat. What's one word that describes how you're feeling right now? Just one word. There's no right or wrong. It's just one word. Okay? No right or wrong. Just whatever you're feeling at this particular moment. Okay. Excellent. You're just reflecting on how you're feeling at this particular moment. Super. I'm going to share my screen again. And I just want to remind you folks that we did that. That pause probably took less than 4 minutes. You simply did 3 breaths together where you allowed a pause at the beginning and at the end. And I just share that with you to remind you that that is what I call a micro activity where you can pause and start again at any time. So I know that some people do that, and they do it sometimes for more than 3 breaths, but they do it in between meetings with clients or colleagues. I just throw that out there for you as a tool that you can consider to use to just ground yourself and just pause briefly and center and calm yourself, and using your breath as a way to do that. And again, you can start again at any time. Another activity that you can engage in, and this is a micro activity as well. Again, I'm just coining that phrase, that these are little things that you can do, that you can build in. And thinking about doing them is not the same thing as actually doing them. You can get the benefit of the pause by taking the pause. You can get the benefit of focusing your attention by actually doing it. And basically what you do in focusing your attention is you intentionally start at the bottoms of your feet or the top of your head, whichever direction you want to go, and you just scan through your body. Am I feeling any tension in any part of my body? I just did that quickly, and I realized I'm feeling some tension in my shoulders. So what I might do is I might take a couple of breaths and send that breath through my imagination into my shoulders to relieve that tension. But you scan your body for where you may be holding any particular tension, and then you intentionally let that go. You can also scan your thoughts. What's going on in my head right now? What are the thoughts that I'm thinking? Is there something that's on my mind? You can also allow yourself to let go of that. And you can also scan your emotions. What am I feeling right now? How do I feel? Am I feeling any anxiety, fear, joy, pain. What am I feeling right now? And again, by focusing your attention and letting go of these things, you're taking responsibility for wherever you may be at this particular moment. You can also ask yourself, and again, it was referred to, this is a very classic, this is an acronym that's used a lot in a variety of recovery programs. You can ask yourself, am I hungry? And I did see that somebody noted in the chat, and I share this with them. They noted in the chat that how they're feeling right now is they're feeling hungry. So you can ask yourself, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Or am I tired? And you can answer these questions and do what you can in this particular moment to meet those particular needs. If you're hungry, can you get a snack? Can you eat something? And if you can't do that right now, or with any of these, if you can't take care of the need right now, you can acknowledge that you have the need and acknowledge and commit to yourself that you will address the need when you actually have the time to do that, when you make the time to do that. So keeping that in mind too, you can ask yourself, am I hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? And if yes to any of those, what do I need right now to manage that? And can I give that to myself now? And if I can't do it now, I can commit to taking care of it when I can. Also, keeping in mind that this work, hearing other people talk about the things that we hear them talk about, experiencing the emotions that people bring to the interactions we have with them, they have an impact on us. Also, knowing how and where stress actually shows up in your body and in your reactions, how you interact with other people, things like that. Considering too that, and I think Susan, you said this, peer support, and sometimes that's you get support in the form of peer support. Sometimes it's from a supervisor. However, but keeping in mind that you don't want to be doing this work alone, that you have some sort of opportunity to connect with others who might be doing the same work or similar work to help decrease your isolation in regard to the work. Also talking it through, and it was mentioned when we talked about what are some of the strategies that can help. Talking it through is definitely you plus one or more person. Sometimes people have group support or group supervision where they can talk with their colleagues, or being in this learning community is a way of talking it through with more than one person at a time. And taking time away as needed when possible. I don't know about you, I am very fortunate in my position. I get a certain number of personal days every year. I get paid vacation time, and I know that that's a valuable resource. And I have to tell you something, honestly, folks, I've lost that resource at times because I didn't take the time. And it's sometimes those resources, especially vacation time, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I've lost it. And that was not taking the best care I could of myself. Excuse me. Some programs, agencies, work settings have employee assistance programs or other sponsored benefits. Again, keeping in mind, folks, unless we take advantage of these things, they're not going to necessarily take advantage of us. Needing support and wanting support is part of being a professional. It doesn't mean that you're not a professional if you ask for help or if you use your resources. You're actually being a professional by making sure that you're well physically, emotionally, and spiritually, so that you can ethically, and I'm underlining and thinking about what Susan said earlier, so that you can ethically carry out, ethically and effectively and empathically and compassionately carry out your work. We're the ones, I as an individual am responsible for the quality of my interactions with the people that I provide services to. Yeah, understood, Lisa. It is an extraordinary benefit to be given. I think we're given 5 personal days every work anniversary, which is that's 5 a year. It's pretty extraordinary. So the other thing I'll just say too, folks, that part of self-care is pursuing outside work fulfillment. You know, I mentioned to you earlier that when I started my social service career, I started by providing direct services to people living with HIV and AIDS in 1991. And I can tell you very quickly that a large part of my social circle was connected through the work that I was doing. There were colleagues that I worked with that became very close and very important friends. And it had its downside because we never were able to set the work down. So just this idea of making sure that we are also pursuing things outside of our work that are also fulfilling is a way to make sure that we're getting sort of restored and getting positive energy in that we can draw on when we need it. So considering, and this is sort of a final thought I'll leave us with before we go to the evaluation, which I would very much appreciate your feedback, is that consider that, especially around wellness and self-care, we can't really think our way into a new way of acting. We can act our way into a new way of thinking. So really, it's underlying what we've been talking about pretty much since the beginning about making an adjustment, taking actions in order to manage the impact of our work so that we can continue to do that work and also stay emotionally, physically, and spiritually healthy. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a moment to say thank you to everybody in the learning community today. I really appreciate the opportunity to have been with you and to been able to be in this conversation with you today. Thank you so much, everybody. Take very good care.